trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region. For we women and we children. That must be the ambition of the Caribbean and the Caribbean and the Caribbean.
And a very good evening to you and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Of course, it's our Open Word podcast this evening, and we will be speaking with Professor Clive Thomas as usual. Today we are going to be talking about cash transfers. You remember that Buxton proposal that Professor Thomas unveiled in Buxton 2018. It's 5 years ago. It was at the annual EUC Guyana Emancipation Symposium, and it caused quite a stir in the country. And ever since then, whenever one talks about policies as regards to the use of our oil resources, that's the first thing on the agenda. We make bold to say that it is perhaps the only innovative proposal that has been put on the table that has to do with a creative way of making sure that oil resources get to the people of Guyana, So welcome wherever you're joining us from, whether you're joining us from Guyana or you're joining us from the wider Caribbean. Those of you who are joining us from North America, good evening. Those of us joining from Europe, good night. Good night. It's Emancipation Weekend, and I know we are gearing up for events all over Guyana. We have our events in Buxton. There is ACDA as their event in Georgetown on the 1st. The Buxton event is on July the 31st. I know they have the soiree at Hope Town. And then on the 1st, I will be spending the day in Belladrum. I did so last year, and I'm going to go back to Belladrum and spend the day there. I'll spend a couple of hours in Buxton and then try to make it to the National Park for the ACDA event, and then spend the rest of the day in West Berbice in Belgium. So good evening to you all and welcome to our Open Word podcast, our special edition of Politics 101. I want to thank all of you for continuing to support our programming on Politics 101. It has become quite a household name in Guyana. Wherever I go in the country, people mention it, and we are very glad to do that because we think it's an important aspect of political work. And people feel so too. The technology has made it possible, and I'm glad to be doing this. So welcome to our edition tonight. Of course, it's our weekend edition. Let's bring Professor Thomas in right away. Professor Thomas, good evening.
Good evening, David.
We have been talking from time to time about the expected auction of the oil blocks, and it should have happened since last year, December. They postponed it, and now it's postponed again. Any thoughts on the constant postponement of this auction?
Well, I would hope that it means the government has given serious consideration to the issues involved in the oil blocks. At the beginning, it came across as a quick fix, but oil block auctions are not quick fixes. They require a lot of deliberate speed. They're very complex and they're very complicated. And I'm hoping the government is doing the necessary preparatory work to ensure it doesn't end up as a dud. Because coming out of this, we have to expect an improvement in the fiscal terms of the existing production sharing agreement. And that is going to be manifested if, in fact, we do better with those terms in this oil blocks auction. So a lot is at stake. There's been a lot of criticism of the existing PSA, and we have a chance to test whether those criticisms are worthwhile, whether this incentive effect of alternatives may prove to be true, and therefore what we might have is probably an agreement that is better than we can have, in fact, achieve at this point in time, when the industry is now about to explode in exponential growth.
Thank you, Professor, for those remarks. And I can't let you move on to our substantive item today without going back to a proposal that you have made on behalf of the WPA. And that is a proposal for us to have a national oil company. And it's gaining a lot of currency, a lot of attention, because I noticed they've been talking about it. But I was in church last weekend, and a couple of my villagers, one of them a very famous education expert who's now retired and returned home, inquired of me of it, and thought that it's something that is worth discussing more. If we had a national oil company, how would that be? How would that have been an asset as we are going into these auctions?
And the major thing is that if we will be on the inside of the company, we won't be just regulating them. We'll also be an operator within the company and a contractor to ourselves, who are also owners. So we would have our stake represented in the operations of the company. Remember, companies are governed by company law, not by public law governing corporations. And when we have to negotiate our positions in a company, people don't necessarily respond in the way they would if they were a public corporation, because a private company assumes that they're in the business for making profit, and they would assume that any transactions that they undertake are going to be profitable, else they won't undertake it. So being on the inside of these negotiations is very important for us to be able to guide and understand the decisions that we are made, and to participate in them, more importantly.
Thank you very much for that. And we will continue to push for a national oil company. We cannot be accused of just criticizing the government, because that's something.
Because you see, in the very auctions, a national oil company will be allowed to bid.
There you go.
Will be allowed to bid, and therefore play a part in steering the price.
There you go. There you go. There you go. There you go. And I was making the point, Professor.
We can't bid as a public company. We can't bid as just a government.
A government, right.
But be holding the auction, and it would be improper for the holder of the auction to be bidding in the auction.
Right.
That's ridiculous, yeah.
Right. So you all have heard it here, and we are going to continue to press for that, because we don't want just to be criticizing the government. We want to be putting proposals on the table. We want to be putting an alternative vision on the table. And I always tell people, in the process of resisting and protesting, one is in effect making proposals for something different, something new. And we want to be part of helping our country to move forward, not just criticizing and criticizing. We do that. We will continue to criticize the government when it's doing the wrong thing. But we want always to put something on the table to say, yes, we disagree with what you're doing, but here is what we are proposing. Professor Thomas?
Yes. I think that's a correct position to take, because we want to be constructive in the sense that we want to represent the interests that we are championing. That is the poor and the powerless. We want to make sure that their views are always on the table. And the best arguments in support of them are being put in front of the consideration of the government itself.
Yes, and talking about the poor and the powerless, of course, that's a term that you popularized in Guyana, going back to the 1970s, and it's a term that has lived through the years.
I have a book with that title.
Yes.
Published by Macmillan, yeah, The Poor and the Powerless.
Yes, The Poor and the Powerless, 1988, no? 1988.
I can't remember the exact date, but around that time.
I think it's 1988.
It's the
The Rise of the Authoritarian State is 1984, and The Poor and the Powerless in 1988. I remember well because I had to use it when I was at the university back then, and I have used it in my courses over the years. Professor, talking about the poor and the powerless, 5 years ago, you were invited to the EUC Guyana Emancipation Symposium. And I don't think we who organized that forum expected what happened. I mean, you came there, there were two other panelists. Nigel Hughes was on the panel, and we had invited Raphael Trotman. He sent someone from his ministry, a young lady. But you proceeded to make your presentation, and your presentation turned out to be a proposal for what you call cash transfers to the poor, and then the rest is history. Take us back to 5 years. I know 5 years not long ago. I'm not asking about 50 years now. Well, first of all, what motivated you to come up with that proposal at that point in time? It was 2 years after it was announced that we found oil. We had not yet started to pump oil. And was it not brazen of you to, in the circumstances, come up with such a bold proposal? What motivated you to make that proposal at that particular time?
Well, two things primarily. First, it's not a new idea. The notion of cash transfers to the poor has been around, and progressive economists have, from time to time, made it part of their proposals for reforming the world system as regards poverty and dependence, and to find a way for establishing a more just and equal world. So it has that history to it, and so I don't want to come across as if I was the originator of the concept, because I did not originate the concept of the cash transfer. It has always been with us, in fact, going right back into early English history, in the poor laws and the efforts being made by trade unionists and the early abolitionists and so forth in Europe to try to find a means of lifting the poor out of poverty. So the idea of transfers to the poor, or the building of a social safety net system for the poor, has always been with us, as long as we've had economies. And I think it became more marked as we became more and more capitalized and develop a market system which tends to emphasize efficiency and de-emphasize considerations of compassion and so forth.
And of course, you made the proposal, and the media were there, and they reported it extensively. And then a debate at all levels of the society, at the level of government and opposition, the politicians, at the level of economists and other policymakers, and definitely
then we held a symposium.
We had the symposium at Critical Labor College after then, and certainly among the people, it caused a lot of stir among the people. Were you surprised at that kind of response from the society?
I was surprised more by the negativity that came from certain quarters.
Yeah,
I remember very well, and I wrote the very first article. I did so in a situation where the president at the time, who was Granger, had called it a payout or a handout.
Yes.
And I consider that to be extremely disparaging, because when a similar effort is being made to sustain private firms, private companies, to be able to make them competitive, as we were trying to do to make the poor competitive and play a role in society, we treated incentives, we treated worthwhile transfers of state wealth or people's wealth to the state, those companies. But we tend to debase the notion of a similar transfer to the poor by calling it a handout or payout. And I thought that was something that was repugnant and inconsistent with the ideals of the APNU as I understood them at the time. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to revisit the whole topic and to write an extensive series of articles that lasted from the end of September until the middle of January in the Starbuck News every Sunday. I think there were about 40 such articles.
Yes.
And for 14 weeks successively, I attempted to give a formal definition and an explanation of what that was intended to mean.
Yes, and of course, the proposal has attracted, as you said, some negative response, but also some positive responses. And over the 5 years, we have seen some changes, some shift in people's perspective on it, but there's still doubts in some areas. What has been the experience? I mean, I remember the time when you came up with the proposal. I had not been familiar with it. Of course, I'm not an economist, but as a political scientist, I should have. And I began to do my own research. And I remember writing a couple of columns at that time. I was a columnist in the Hydro News. But I studied the experience in Latin America in particular, and places like Brazil and so forth. And then I discovered that even in Jamaica, they had used the concept, and that a study was being done about using it in the Eastern Caribbean. So as you pointed out, it was quite a popular concept. Tell us what has been the experience of the use of it in terms of reducing poverty in places like Latin America and parts of Asia and Africa.
There have been several World Bank studies and studies by other institutions like the Commonwealth Secretariat, like the United Nations Economic and Social Council, and they have found on the whole that there's strong merit, great merit in the notion of cash transfers. They might be quibbling about whether they should be unconditional or whether they should be conditional, and that is linked to some condition that the people who are getting the transfer must fulfill. And regardless of what position you take, there has been a widespread recognition that these transfers have proven to be worthwhile. But there's also a fear among, I think, the major institutions that the criticism or the reflexology in it, where people see it transfers to the poor as a handout or a gift, particularly the political classes in some states, make them unhappy about supporting the proposal. For example, the book that we discussed, prepared by the World Bank, the Systematic Country Diagnostic of Guyana, the SCD document, that also evaluated the cash transfer to the poor and generally came around in support of such transfers being conditional. They highlighted the difficulties and problems it's trying to do that. But even among those institutions, there's a clear recognition that it's one of the fastest routes towards eliminating some of the worst ravages of poverty. Remember, poverty is a disease and it does not get better if it's not treated. So the longer and the more persistent the poverty becomes, the more difficult it is for states to remedy the situation. And this is one of the quickest and fastest means of trying to turn around poverty. Because you're giving the aid and support where you think is most effective by bolstering the income of the poor. But there's also another tradition, and I think the class tradition. Most people feel that the poor will not work if they get a handout, as they call it. The labor supply will dwindle. People will stop working, rely on their handouts, and never want to work again. But there's no evidence of that ever happening in any place. And I feel that this is an insult against the poor to believe that they would, if they get a handout at the level of the basic income of the country, that they would stop working and decide to live on that. They want to improve themselves like everybody else. And I say that from personal experience because I grew up in a poor household. A household with 7 children, including me, where my mother never ever worked, and there was no father in the house. So we know what poverty is, and we know the ambition was always for them to get out of poverty, was to get out of poverty. That's why I have brothers who are professors in biology, judges in the United States, sisters who hold PhDs in Florida. Everybody in the family has been able to escape poverty. Like they had mistresses in the Bahamas. Everybody in the family has been able to escape poverty. And that is because how it is we grew up, we knew that this is a condition we had to fight, not something we had to embrace and just support and do nothing with. And nobody taught us that with just the experience of the livelihoods of the people around us. And I would say that almost everybody I met growing up had a good thing to say about education and about health and about people trying to improve themselves. They were never derogatory and from drinkers and sporters and all that. They did indulge in alcohol and sports, but they never did that to the detriment of the improvement, which is the goal of the people in those communities. We grew up in Old Boys Town, and we grew up in Dorman Street, Leopold Street. These are the places where I live. And nobody in the neighborhood has ever not wanted to improve themselves. I still have who I knew from those times.
Yeah.
All of them have made something of themselves, but of course, 90% of them had to migrate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
like
yeah.
I want people to just leave Guyana and free to make themselves better.
Yeah. No, and Professor, excuse me, I can attest to what you're saying. I myself, like all of us, grew up in poverty-stricken households and communities, and my mother migrated early, and so we were raised by an aunt, and I can never remember ever when she got an extra money, whether it's a gift from some richer family or she got something from a family from overseas, that she ever used it to
splurge.
It was always to get something that we didn't have.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly, I did not have a geometry set. And my aunt or brother came from Georgetown and he gave her some money. And the first thing she did was to call me and give me the money and say, go buy a geometry set. I will never forget that. So when I hear people say that when you give people a supplementary sum of money that they're going to splurge, I just don't know what.
It's not my experience. And the people who are saying so do not have that experience.
Yes.
That is what I found out. They were always petty bourgeois, middle class, and therefore had a negative view of poverty, those below them. And I can remember one professor actually wrote and said, I'm offering people astronomical sums of money. I know the professor,
Yeah.
but I responded by saying that I don't know his income, which is quite true. But I'm sure that is less than 10% of his monthly income in the
Yes.
United States where he's living now.
Yes. Yeah. Professor, one of the criticisms of the proposal was that uh, it is better to spend money on things like infrastructure and education and so forth. I can't remember that you ever proposed that as an alternative to indirect spending. But people raise that as if you were proposing it as an alternative. Expand on that.
Yeah, that's a simple psychological dodge. They really feel that you are naive enough for us to argue that cash transfers should be the only social program in the country. But nobody who talks about cash transfers to the poor has ever proposed that this should be the only program. They all recognize that you have to have all the safety nets, you have to supply education, you have to supply all the basic health needs of the community, you have to supply the basic infrastructural needs of the country. You have to do all the things that you are supposed to do in a country, as well as to treat that as part of the essential. It's not to substitute it or to displace any other thing, but to make sure that it enjoys the priority of all the other things. But what has happened, that has been, when it's accepted now, has become a favorite mechanism for politicians to hand out. So the notion of a handout, they have embraced, and they want to be the persons handing out because they will get votes for doing it. And that is what we want to avoid as well. That is why the proposal has always been to create a legally sanctioned part of the social network for the poor that is enshrined in law and institutions. So this is not just giving people money and saying, go and do what you want. It has to be codified in law. It has to be part of a regulated structure where people have legal rights to what their entitlements say, and they have legal obligations because they have to pay their taxes on it. If you get money or income from the state, if the tax law says all income has to be declared, you have to declare your income. But if that is the only source of income, your level of taxation will be very minimal.
Yes, yes. And of course, those who, the rich people in society who may not need that cash transfer, that be compensated through taxation, right?
Of course, they have to pay taxes because of additional income.
It's additional
income. The reason why you're doing it that way is to ensure you don't leave anybody behind.
Right.
Make sure because you don't leave any. It's better, as they say, to let 10 guilty men get away from the hangman's noose than to hang an innocent person. It's the same thing with the cash transfers. It's better to make sure that no poor people are left behind and tell them try and scam the system. Yes. But you have to police it, to regulate it, to make sure that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. But another outcome has to do with the nature of our society, ethnic nature of our society. That if you give to each household, there's no charge there of ethnic favoritism.
Or political favoritism.
Or political favoritism, right? So it has a democratic outcome to it.
Yeah, that is in fact that was one of the major reasons why I suggested that it be given to every household. Because once it's given to every household, you cannot be accused of using it as racial or political propaganda or supporting one section of the community or another. Every household, they reconcile the payment through the system of taxation. People might, of course, voluntarily refuse to take it, as can happen. People might say, I won't bother claim that.
Right. And some
people will do.
Yes. And as some well-to-do people have told me that if that were to become a reality, they would take the money and they would donate it to causes.
Yeah,
Yes,
course.
I've heard that from
You
visitors.
offer these programs as part of it.
Yes, yes.
You can say that you can encourage people through the legislation, groups that volunteer, to try to win from people who can afford it, not to claim it, and allow them to use it as direct aid for people who might be in need. And then a lot of people who I think might do it, might surprise you. It wouldn't be 100%, but it would be a significant percent. So the source of voluntary funding can also come through that mechanism, so you could enforce both the state giving and the voluntary giving. So the proposal was trying to be innovative in several different ways. And nothing has happened. But there's also the additional safeguard that the WPA may propose. And that is that it should be subject to a feasibility study.
Yes, I was coming to that.
So that nobody can come and say that the thing was implemented without a proper study. There should be a social and economic appraisal of this program. And a verdict arrived at as to recommend going ahead or not.
Yes, and
study.
When you made the proposal, it was based and the 5,000 US number that was picked up.
Astronomical.
And so on as astronomical. But you came to that figure based on your forecast of how much oil we were going to be pumping at the height of the oil. And you also said $5,000, but you also said 10%, right? Of the takings.
And also we can pursue, we can proportionately raise it as we go beyond that point.
Right.
If we generated more revenue than is needed to pay the 5,000 and keep it in the 10% limit, we then increase the payments. The law would specify all of that because we structured the law. So we specify that it might go 1%, 2% per annum, or something like that to ensure that it's considered an integral part of the poverty program.
Yeah, and coming back to the democratic nature of the proposal, some people said it was a socialist idea, but it is something that is used in the United States, in Alaska, in parts of Texas, in parts of California. In fact, one city in California did a feasibility study. Well, not a feasibility study, but they did a study of how people used the transfer that was given to them. And they found that less than 2% of the money was used for tobacco or alcohol. And this is in the United States of America.
It wouldn't surprise us because we came from poor communities.
Yes.
We know what goes on.
Yes. So speak to the ideology, the fact that it cuts across ideological lines.
Well, I think that's fundamental and basic thing. That it's really based on social understanding and based on recognition of social classes and the importance of ensuring the classes are put on competitive bases and standing within society. And that can be both at the socialist level, as a radical solution, or it can be attempted at the capitalist level as a more competitive liberal solution. But both of them converge in the recognition of the priority that you must give to the poor. And both sides need allies. And I therefore think that it is positive.
Yes. Professor Clive Thomas, yes, here talking about cash transfer. Professor, I think you've answered this question in your testimony, but I'm still going to ask it to get a direct answer from you. And that is, you You have made it out of poverty. You've been a professor. You have been a consultant, and all of the things. Why are you still preoccupied with the condition of the poor?
I do. I do. It's reflexive. It's a
Yeah,
reflex of my upbringing.
yeah,
I give the tribute to my mother. That's how we were brought up.
right, 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 right.
She was very straightforward. There's some things that I've never really lived up to for her, but she was very straightforward and very, 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 very honest. I remember, I remember once in the household, she says, "You all think you're all honest?" And all of us say yes. She said, "Come, let me ask you a question. You go to a restaurant, and when you get to the seat that they put you to sit down to eat, and you see somebody leave money behind, what would you do?" You didn't tell you to keep the money or anything other than go and tell the proprietor. She said, "I don't want to hear from you till you learn your lesson."
There you go. There you go. There you go. Professor Clifton. Professor, is there anything about the history of the cash transfer? I learned today that it has gone back as far back into British history, and I knew of the poor laws, but I didn't put it in the context of cash transfer. Is there anything that you would want to say about the history, the experience of cash transfer that I didn't ask?
Well, those questions I feel that are left to be teased out further.
Right.
I'll make an effort to try and deal with them in a revision, maybe for the 6th or 7th anniversary of the proposal, because I was considering having to look back at it for this program.
Yeah.
And didn't realize there were so many articles that there may be a case can be made for reconfiguring it in terms of ensuring it becomes a more long-lasting than a temporary program that is phased out when poverty disappears.
Yes, yes, yes. When poverty disappears. When poverty disappears. Know the language. When poverty disappears. Professor, we are into the season of emancipation, and it is a pivotal moment in the evolution of our Guyanese and Caribbean society, and I dare say the global society, because slavery was part of a global framework.
And it didn't bring benefits.
That's right.
I'm laughing at you this
That's right.
It didn't bring benefits there.
Yes, here we are 185 years after emancipation. Are there lessons to be learned from a socio-economic standpoint?
Yeah, I think quite a lot of lessons. I might have been joking when I said, and we didn't see anything beneficial from it. And that is because I think the debate in the United States shows how deep and vastly different are people's perceptions about poverty is. I mean, that you could have a presidential contender supported by others, and yet in a state where there's a significant Black population and has a history and a record of less than honest treatment of the Blacks within the community, to argue that slavery brought benefits is, in my mind, something I'd never thought I'd ever hear again. I thought it was language of the 1950s and 60s. So that to my mind is shocking.
Yeah.
And it shows that we're not far away from reversal and regression back to the standards that we thought we had achieved. That has been particularly painful for me, although it's not a place where I live, but I know it will shape a lot of the world and a lot of the outcomes in the world, particularly in this hemisphere where we live, when the political leadership could embark on such an adventure and be contending for leadership of the world's richest country.
Professor Clive Thomas here on Emancipation Weekend. Professor, thank you so much for coming on.
Don't mention it, David.
Sharing of your wisdom and your expertise, and shining some light on this persistent question of poverty. And I noted your assertion when poverty comes to an end. I dare say that for us in the WPA, that is our objective, to wipe poverty from the face of our country, and in the process of the accumulation that would come from us becoming a petro state, we think the possibilities are there for that. Professor Clive Thomas, thank you again. And to you, our audience, again, thanks very much for staying with us. And of course, we have been talking economics. We've been talking about cash transfer, the Buxton proposal. This is Emancipation Weekend. And it's a time for us to reflect on the legacies of slavery. We are still facing the legacy of slavery, but with the coming of oil wealth, we have a window because, all the experts are saying that we are going to be shifting from fossil fuels to renewables in another 30, 40 years, if that long. And so there's an opportunity for us to reap the benefits and to make it work for the poor and the powerless. And that means that the most fundamental legacy of slavery, that is poverty, that we deal with it. Thanks all of you who have contributed to our Emancipation Fund. It's not too late for you to contribute to our fund. We have expanded our donors. We are making a donation to Belgium. We are making a donation to Coffee 250. And of course, we are making a donation to Buxton, where we originated the drive. So please contribute to it. Here, the information is on the screen. There, our Cash App and our PayPal. Please contribute. Like I said, we have expanded our pool of places to which we are making donation. In addition to Buxton, we are making a donation to Belgium. We are making a donation to Coffee 250. Those of you who have made contributions, many, many times. Some of you have made substantial contributions, and that is why we've been able to expand the destination of our donations. And those of you who have not yet made your donation, please do so now. We have up until Sunday so that we can be able to get the funds over to the places I've mentioned for them to get their emancipation events going. So until tomorrow night, David Hines here, of course, saying to you, love is the watchword. We love you, we love you, we love you because it is you who made us who we are. The fact that some of us have a microphone, we don't own that microphone. That microphone was created and bought by you. It is you, the ordinary people, who made the sacrifices for us to get an advanced education and to go to other parts of the world and to learn from those parts of the world. And what is wonderful that in the words of Walter Rodney, that we have a responsibility to give back in tangible ways to our community. And that's what we are doing. That's what we're doing in the WPA. That's what we're doing in all the organizations that we are part of. And it's an example that we want to leave with our people. That as you make it up the social ladder, that you remember that there are those who didn't make it up with you. I remember there were so many people who, as we said, were as bright or even brighter than me when we were going to school, but circumstances, they could not go on. And those of us who, a small minority of us, who have been able to get opportunities, we must regard those opportunities not as something to do with our personal genius and hard work. Of course, we work hard, but that those opportunities came as part of the collective effort of all our people. And that's our message here on this Emancipation Eve. So I'll see you all tomorrow night and Sunday night. On Monday night, we'll be coming directly from Buxton, the Emancipation Eve there in Buxton, the folk night, the Black is Beautiful folk night. We'll be having a range of artists led by the Yoruba singers, Buxton Fusion, the Buxton Pride Steel Band, Odessa Primus, Lassell Juke, Kwekwe, Nancy Story, Brian Chester, singing, dancing, the whole works. So wherever you are, make sure you come to Buxton on that night. And then I know all over the country on the 1st of August, they'll be doing their thing. I will be in Belgium. I'll be in Belgium after spending a little time in Buxton and in Georgetown to go out into the countryside and to spend most of the day with our people as they observe emancipation. So that's our word, and I'll see you all tomorrow night.
One race from the same place that make the same trip on the same ship. So we must push one common intention. It's for a better life in the region for the woman and